Good morning, Boulevard. Monday morning, I happened on an interview of OSU football coach Mike Gundy, and he was doing his best to try to explain the total domination that OU had over OSU this last Saturday. And Coach Gundy said this. He said, if I had to do it again, I would do it differently. We did not have a good game plan. We realized, Gundy said, that we had underestimated several of their players. He says, as an armchair quarterback on Monday, that he would do things differently. Now, I would speak, as you know me, as a loyal, diehard OSU fan, but I would tell you today that I think that they possibly underestimated about 22 of OU's players. Coach Gundy and his staff's plan and their subsequent decisions were made, you might say, with a distorted view of who they were playing, and it led to a certain disaster for the team. So how about this morning, you and I, Monday a.m. armchair a little bit, armchair quarterback, and just for a few moments, not armchairing Bedlam, don't want to go there, but armchairing instead of the year 2020, and I might hear you say already, even from your homes, hey, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go back in this hideous year. But I'm going to ask this if we just for a moment that we might push rewind, and we might think about some of the decisions that we made. Think about some of the decisions that you made as a parent. Decisions that you might make differently. Think about some of the decisions that you made as a spouse. How about at your job? And think about some of the decisions you made with your money, things that you invested in, or the generosity that you displayed or did not display. Then think about not only the good decisions that you made, but also I would encourage you to think about the bad decisions that you made. What would you change if you had a chance to go back and see things differently? Where and when could you say with Coach Gundy, knowing what we know now, we would have played it a little bit differently? Well, let me soft toss an idea to you for just a moment. That as OSU's inadequate plan and poor decision making were based on what we might call a distorted view of their opponent, in the same way, our often inadequate plans and our poor decisions are directly connected to a distorted view of our God. And although their distorted view was of their opponent, who they were playing against, our distorted view that has the same effect on our decisions and our plans, our distorted plans are often about who we are playing for. See, when my vision of God is unclear, it's going to consistently cloud my ability to make good decisions. It happens all the time in marriage. Well, I talk with people who are married, and one of them sometimes can be incredibly untrusting of the other. When I ask them why, they don't really even know. They know that their partner is trustworthy, and yet they continually behave, they continually make decisions, they continually question their spouse like they are not a trustworthy person. They have a distorted view. Besides the facts, they have a distorted view of their spouse, and it robs them of the rich relationship that comes when there's trust in the relationship. We do that in marriage, and we do that in our relationship with God all the time. But when we have that distorted view of God, when we have an unclear view of who He is, a couple things happen. One, in the same way, we're unable to trust God. We can't trust Him as provider, and so we scurry about trying to make sure that we have everything we need. We can't trust Him for our peace, and so we're continually filled with an anxiousness. When we have that unclear view, that vision of God, then not only are we not able to trust God, but we're unable to see ourselves clearly. When I have a distorted view of God, I'm unable to see the vision and calling and say yes to what God has for me. Now, I would tell you that there's all kinds of There's all kinds of reasons that we have a distorted view, a distorted vision of God. Sometimes it may be from a dysfunctional family that we grew up in our lives. Someone didn't fulfill their role, or someone was abusive. There was addictions in the family. And so when we think about God, for whatever reason, that distorts our vision, our image of him. Sometimes it may be a church that you attended, and for whatever reason, maybe grace wasn't practiced. Maybe there was a lot of legalism. Maybe there was too much authority in the leadership. We don't know, but that would have affected some way your view of God and your response to him. But folks, listen, man, when you and I see God as he is, when we have that clear vision of him, then at that point in time, we are able to surrender the control that we think we have, finding the security with him. We all of a sudden, we become more patient with our kids because we see God clearly. We see ourselves as he sees us. And we can begin to catch and hear the vision and the call that God has, and we can begin to say yes. So let me show you this morning a passage in the Old Testament that such as a powerful, powerful image. It shows us this truth so very, very well. If you turn to the book of Isaiah, the book of Isaiah is a book that is found in the Old Testament. It's considered one of the major prophets. It's 66 chapters, so it makes it one of the longest book of prophecy in the Bible, and actually one of the longest books in the Bible. The book of Isaiah was written in approximately 740 BC. And I have been told that it's considered by English and literature people as a book full of incredibly beautiful literature, beside the fact that it is God's word. And as beautiful as it is, it's also about some very, very dark days for God's people, as many of the prophetic books are. And by chapter 5, Isaiah has already had a number of visions. In Isaiah 5, it starts out this, and this is some of that beautiful language. He says, "Now I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a rich and fertile hill." What's that vineyard that Isaiah is talking about? The vineyard is the city of Jerusalem. And if you know anything about Jerusalem and God's people, that was a beautiful gift. Jerusalem was a beautiful gift from him to his children. But 5 verses later, we read more about that beautiful vineyard. Now, let me tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will tear down its hedges, and I will let it be destroyed, and I will break down its walls, and I will let the animals trample it. Why is that? Why this beautiful vineyard that God has given his children? And now he says, I'm gonna let it all go to rot. I'm gonna let it be destroyed. I'm gonna let the animals trample it down. Why? Because Judah, God's children, the country of Judah, was in complete upheaval because of the people's disobedience. Socially, it was in upheaval. Economically, it was in upheaval. Spiritually, it was in complete upheaval. Let me read just a couple verses to you to kind of give you an idea out of chapter 5 what we're looking at. "What sorrow for those who get up early in the morning looking for a drink of alcohol, and they spend long evenings drinking wine to make themselves flaming drunk." Verse 18, "What sorrow for those who drag their sins behind them. They even mock God and say, 'Hurry up and do something. We want to see what you can do. Let the Holy One of Israel carry out his plans, for we want to know what it is.' What sorrow for those who are heroes at drinking wine and boast about all the alcohol they can hold." Judah is in upheaval. They are confusing days and dark days for the people of Judah. And I have to ask you, does that sound familiar? Does that sound remotely familiar? But there's more. Because in the first verse of chapter 6, as Isaiah writes, he writes this: "It was in the year that King Uzziah died that I saw the Lord." Now, King Uzziah, the significance of King Uzziah is this, is that there had been a whole lot of really bad kings for the country of Judah. Basically, bad king after bad king after bad king for the most part. And finally, King Uzziah came to reign. And King Uzziah was a man who was an incredibly godly king for most of his reign. Not only was he a godly king, but he also extended the outreach, extended the influence and prosperity of the country of Judah. The people loved King Uzziah. And he was a good king and a godly king until he came to the place where for some reason he kind of got it in his head that he could serve in the role of the priest, and he went in and offered sacrifices and burnt offerings, I believe, in the temple. And God said, that's not your role. And things kind of went downhill from then, but the people still held him, or at least had memories of him being a good and godly king who had brought them much prosperity. And so Isaiah says, in the year that Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. I saw the Lord. He was sitting on a lofty throne, and the train of his robe, it says, filled the temple. See, in this time of incredible chaos, it's important to see that Isaiah is given this clarity in his vision of God. He is able to see God as he really is. Now I would tell you that when our situation, as it becomes unclear in our life, as it becomes dark at times, as it becomes chaotic, what we need is not situational clarity in our life, but instead, what we need is this clear picture of God. And God often reveals himself more clearly in times of adversity. Let me say it again. God often reveals himself more clearly in times of adversity. Think about it. Think about your life at times when God has come in and really intersected, when your faith in him became really true. It grew roots. The legs of your faith grew strong. In most of our situations in our life, those things happened at times when things were rough. Things were chaotic, things when we didn't know which direction to take and the why on the road. And in some way, God comes through when we had an incredible need, when we needed his wisdom, when we needed his strength. God came through and showed us. God consistently reveals himself even more clearly in times of adversity. And that's exactly what he does here. Things are in upheaval, and King Uzziah, who the people have revered, all of a sudden has gone. And so now the people are going like, what now? What do we do? We don't know where to go. We don't know what to turn to. Who's going to take care of us? Who's going to provide our prosperity? And God comes to Isaiah and says, in a sense, I will take care of those things. And this is what Isaiah sees. Verses 1 and 2 says this: he was sitting on a lofty throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. And attending him, were mighty seraphim, each having 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. With 2 wings they covered their feet. With 2 they flew. Now, something I want to point out to you is this, that when Isaiah says, I saw the Lord, you might notice there that in your Bible that it probably says capital L, small O-R-N-D, all right? The English translators of the Bible have this way of differentiating between words for God, all right? And if they use the letters capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, they are talking about the word Yahweh, which is basically the Hebrew name for God. But in this situation, when he says he sees God, he doesn't see Yahweh, capital L-O-R-D, God. What he sees is capital L, small O-R-D. What does that mean? That means that's not the name of God necessarily as much as the character of God. God, Adonai. And Adonai means this. Adonai means sovereign. Now catch this, folks. At a time when there's incredible chaos and confusion, at a time where there's division within the country, when there's a leadership gap, a vacuum of leadership, that Isaiah sees God, and the vision that God wants to show to Isaiah about himself is this. Listen, I am sovereign God. I am in control. Folks, listen, It doesn't take a lot for us to translate that into what we are going through as a community, as a country, as a world right now, a time of chaos, a kind of division. There's a vacuum in leadership that doesn't really depend on which side that you're on. And God says to Isaiah, I want you to see me as a sovereign God who in the midst of chaos is in control of all things. Not only that, but Isaiah says he saw them, and he saw them on a lofty throne. If you want to see an idea of a lofty throne, of an incredible throne, look at 2 Chronicles 9 sometime and take a look at Solomon's throne. It is a thing of incredible beauty. Not only that, Isaiah says that his train filled the temple. I don't know how long that is. I know the temple was a big place, and for the train to fill the temple would be a long train. I am told that when Princess Elizabeth became Queen Elizabeth, that there was this incredible train that came behind her. And that several pages were taken to carry that train as she stepped forward toward her inauguration into becoming the Queen of England. Why the throne and the train? Why the mention of those things? Because people understood that those were symbols of royalty, of their power and their authority and their influence. Not only was there a lofty throne, but there was also these mighty seraphim. And R.C. Sproul points out that God creates creatures according to their purpose. And birds have 2 wings because that's how many wings it takes to fly. But these seraphim don't have 2 wings, they have 6 wings, 2 to fly. 2, Isaiah records, that cover their faces because of the glory of God, and 2 to cover their feet. If you remember Moses coming to God, he said, take off your shoes. You are standing on holy ground. And Isaiah 6:3 says they were calling out to each other, these seraphim who surrounded the throne. They were calling out to each other, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of heaven's armies. The whole earth, it says, is filled with his glory. Now, I would say this to you. There's not 3 holies because they needed that many holies to fit the melody of the song. Okay? There's not 3 holies just because. In English, we have these literary devices sometimes. We may put something in italics. We make something bolder. We may underline something. We may even throw an exclamation point on it. Or in this day and age, we might throw 4 or 5 or 6 exclamation points behind something. Hebrew has some of the same literary devices, or at least literary devices to make emphasis. And in Hebrew, if you really, really want to emphasize something, you say it twice. You would say, as Jesus said in a sense, truly, truly, I say to you. That is an emphasis. That is him saying, hey, I've got something really important for you to hear. Truly, truly, I say unto you. The seraphim are singing this. Not just holy is the Lord. Not just holy, holy is the Lord. But holy, holy, holy is the Lord. They do something that's almost unknown throughout Scripture, that something is repeated 3 different times. Holy, 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 they cry, is the Lord of heaven's armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory. And Isaiah writes that the temple foundations, the tangible foundations of the temple, were shaken simply by the presence of God and by the singing of the seraphim. And that there was smoke, and I don't even know where the smoke came from. It was just an incredible effect. See, God is choosing to reveal himself to Isaiah as sovereign in this crazy, crazy time. And I want us to know this morning that God desires to do the same for you. It may not be the exact same picture, but he wants to reveal himself to you. And he will, if you will seek him, and if you'll say to him simply this, God, I want to see you more clearly. Show me where the distorted vision of you is. Show me where the distorted images of you that are keeping me from being obedient to you. I want to see you more clearly. Isaiah sees God clearly as God is. Now, before we go on, let me just say this to you. I want to be careful. Because when you and I live our lives against the backdrop of a distorted image of God, then our lives, our relationships, our priorities, our decisions become distorted. If you didn't catch it, that's what the point I've been trying to make for the last few minutes. That distorted image of God distorts everything about our life. That's the reason for it to be clear. And so let's look now that Isaiah has seen God clearly. Let's look now what his response is to that. Isaiah 6:5 he says, then I said, it's all over. I am doomed, for I am a sinful man. I have filthy lips, and I live among a people with filthy lips. And yet I have seen the King, the Lord of heaven's armies. Isaiah makes it very clear. He is doomed. I like what I think the KJV says. He says, I am undone. It's the sense of being unhinged. It's the idea that everything I have counted on in my life to keep it together, everything I have leaned into, everything I have used as a strength, all those things have just become disconnected. They have become as nothing. I am undone. And that happens because Isaiah has had this clear vision of God. He says, I am a man of filthy lips. I don't know what that means for a prophet to have filthy lips, but I do know this, that not only was there this sense in Isaiah of him being a person who was a sinful man, that he actually was specific about the sin that was in his life. He lists this specific sin. I am a man of filthy lips, living amongst a people of filthy lips. And can I say that when we recognize not only that we are sinful, but that we recognize our specific sin, when we are able to confess that specific sin, to hear it come off our lips, it allows Christ to become a specific Savior. I've talked to a lot of people over the years who may repeat something like this. Well, yeah, I was saved back when I was 13 or when I was 17 or when I was 25. God saved me from my sin, and that's good. It's exactly what happens. What I find so often is there's this kind of a generic sense of the sin that God saved them from. And when you push, sometimes it's very difficult for them to be able to actually confess or speak something, a specific sin. And I believe that keeps us from loving God fully when we do not know the specific sin that God has actually saved us from. Folks, you and I, we cannot enter the presence of God's holiness and light without sensing our own sin and darkness. Can't be done. It's daunting. It's daunting to have those things pointed out to us. It makes us uncomfortable. But if I could be frank with you this morning, I would say this, that I believe that some of the reasons that we will not slow down, some of the reasons that we will not pull aside, some of the reasons that we will not take time on a regular basis to open the Word, is because God's presence is found in us, is found at those times. It's found in His Word. It's found as we slow down to listen, and we are fearful that if we slow down, that if we pull aside, that if we open up the Word, that there might be something there that's going to point out something in our life that we don't want illuminated. See, when I'm able to see God clearly as He is, I am able, as Isaiah was, to see myself clearly as God sees me. But you need to remember this, that God sees us, you and I, as deeply stained. There's no doubt about that. He sees what we try to hide from Him, but He also sees us as deeply loved. He sees us deeply stained and broken as we are, but He also sees us as dearly and deeply loved. And so here's what God does for Isaiah, and here's what He does for you and I in love. And I think it's important that we mention that. In Isaiah 6:6, it says, then one of the seraphim blew to me with a burning coal that he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongues. See, he takes this coal and he puts it on Isaiah's lips. Does anybody wince when you hear that? I mean, that just makes me wince. I'm known a little bit here on staff right now as the COVID kid. And let me explain that, okay, lest you think I'm a carrier, all right? I've had a number of situations where I've been exposed and some surgery. And so I have been, in the last 5 weeks, I've gone through 4 different COVID tests, all right? And I've had the back of my skull burned so many times, I think I may actually be beginning to enjoy it. I'm not even sure. Folks, God does not leave us undone. Isaiah says, I'm undone. I am doomed. But God, although his presence points that out, he does not leave us there. And so it says his guilt is removed. When the coal touches the lips, it cleanses. It is a cleansing for him. But not only a cleansing, it is a preparation. The guilt is removed. Listen, folks, the world denies guilt. The world wants to play down guilt. Oh, guilt is bad. We don't want to feel guilty about anything. But God uses guilt. God uses guilt to show us our sin, to show us our real state. And he shows us that so that he can remove not only the guilt, but the sin that causes us. The world denies guilt. The world despises brokenness. It honors strength. It honors scholarship. It honors prosperity. But God has consistently, God has consistently honored and used the broken if they will only admit that they are broken. See, when you and I see God clearly, life becomes more clear. When we begin to see God clearly, we are able, as Isaiah did, to see ourselves as God sees us. And God shows us our brokenness so that he can heal us, so that he can cleanse us, so that he can prepare us. What comes next? What comes next is this incredible calling now that Isaiah has seen God and seen himself as God sees him. Isaiah 6:8 then says this, then I heard the Lord asking, whom should I send as a messenger to this people? And catch this, in this difficult time, God reveals himself. He shows us who and what we are. And then he calls us. He calls the broken. He calls the uneducated. He calls the despised. Why does he do that? He calls those of us who have been broken, who have painful past, who have experiences that we don't want to talk about. He calls us into service. He calls us into ministry, into compassionate care for other people, because he knows that we will remember that we were broken, and we will remember, hopefully, who has healed us. And that's exactly what he does here. He calls Isaiah a man who calls himself a man of filthy lips. He cauterizes and cleans, and in that he prepares for him. And then he says this in verse 8, then I heard the Lord asking, whom should I send as a messenger to this people? And here is Isaiah's answer. Isaiah says in verses 8 and 9, here am I, send me. Here am I, send me. Who should I send to this people? Isaiah says, here am I, God. He goes from I'm doomed and undone and unhinged. I'm a man of filthy lips. And he hears now God's call after being cleansed and prepared. And he is able to say to God, to the calling that God has for him, a difficult calling, here am I, send me. He says, yes, go and say to this people, listen carefully, but do not understand. Watch closely, but learn nothing. All that means is this. The calling that God has for Isaiah is a difficult calling. He is taking this man, Isaiah, who he has called and cleansed and prepared, and he is sending them to his obstinate children who are disobedient in every way and feel like in some sense they really don't have a need for God. And he says, the mission I'm sending you to are to my people and to your people. And it's going to be a difficult task. And Isaiah knows that. And yet Isaiah says, here am I, send me. See, folks, when I see a vision of God clearly and myself as he sees me, I am able to say yes to the vision and call that God has on my life. I'm able to do the difficult things. I'm able to go where I would not go before. Why? Because I know I've seen God. I'm able to go to broken people, have empathy and compassion. Why? Because I have been broken, but I have been cleansed and healed by God. I have experienced God's love now. So I can go to his obstinate kids as Isaiah did. You can go to people that you would never go to because now you recognize the healing of your brokenness and your painful past that has happened by you seeing God as he really is. Folks, it's no mystery. It's no surprise that we live in an incredibly difficult community. It's a community that has a lot of problems. So many good people. But it's a tough community. Some of the racial tension that has been there in the past and is still there at times, the poverty, the diversity, sometimes lack of jobs and good housing. There's a hopelessness that you find in the eyes of the people at Walmart when you walk the aisles that is indescribable. And that's why, folks, when we begin to talk about our vision here at Boulevard, the vision that God has for us, the difficult mission that he is calling us to as he cleanses us and as he heals our brokenness, as we talk about the number of people that we want to expose to the word, the why of that is this: because we have hope and they are hopeless. The why of that is because we have a message that they need. I talked to a leader or a friend of mine just the other day, and I've had lunch with consistently for a number of years. As he told me his story again, he came from this dysfunctional home, and he grew up, and he took some really, really bad direction. He made some bad decisions in his life. He ended up with an incredible cocaine addiction that he was in for a number of years. But as I sat with him at the table the other day, he has come through CR a number of years ago, and now he's getting ready to be used by God because he has heard God's call into helping in leadership in our Celebrate Recovery program. Folks, when we talk about sobriety houses, sober living houses, or transitional housing, it's not just so we can get into the housing market. It's because we have seen young ladies from Monarch who have come to our church who we have helped find Jesus. But if they get back out in the community, out of rehab, we find that they often fall away. I believe one of the tangible ways of us helping those people follow Christ consistently is to help them in a transitional time in their life with housing. We are talking about sending people globally to places, to nations who have never heard the name of Christ. And just this last week, Ty and Sevi Davison, who spoke to us a couple months ago, he said, "Hey, Steve, we're going to be going in January. We weren't sure if this is going to happen or not, but the tickets are there. We're heading to Japan." And I thought to myself, even in a year like this year, God continues to make his vision happen step by step, slowly, with the patience that only God can have. And why? Why? Because that is the mission that God has given us. And that mission is simply this. The mission is that we help people find Jesus and that we help people follow Jesus. And our vision statements, those points of vision that God has given us, are all about that very mission. It's a difficult mission. But we can say, because we see God clearly, we have seen ourselves clearly, we can say to him, "Yes, God, here am I, send me." Let me ask you a question while I close. Is there a place in your life where your vision of him is not clear? It's a hard thing to know. You probably might not even see it. Are there places you see yourself as you review yourself in the last year where you've made decisions based on insecurity, based on anxiousness instead of God's peace that he offers? Have you been impatient, trying to make something happen as opposed to waiting on God's timing? Is there a place where your vision of him is not clear? Is there a place where you can't see yourself as God sees you? And do you have any idea where that might be rooted? And that might be something in the next few days or in the next month or whatever that you step aside and say, God, show me where I have a vision of you that is distorted and unclear. Show me where I am not seeing myself as you see me, broken and sinful and yet deeply and dearly loved. Folks, I would tell you this morning that this beautiful gift that God gives us, him revealing himself as he is to us, his children, what an incredible gift. He reveals himself so often to us in the Word. In the Word. And so, and I would encourage you, sometimes the Word can be daunting to just open and read, but I would encourage you to reopen maybe to the book of Mark and just open it up and read a chapter and ask yourself simply this. Ask God this: what do you want me to know about you from what I'm reading? What do you want me to know about you from what I'm reading? Boulevard family, when we see God as he really is, we make clear the distorted image. When we see ourselves as he sees us, then you and I looking at a whole new year, 2021, where things are going to continue sometimes to be crazy and chaotic and sometimes dark and sometimes divisive, we can say to him and to the vision and to the calling that he has for us as individuals and to his church, we can say to our God, yes, Lord, here am I. Here am I, send me.